I never used to believe in black zones. You know, those stretches of highway every trucker whispers about, but no one wants to admit they're afraid of. The voids, they'd say. The parts of the map the GPS glosses over. Nothing but static and bad vibes. But let me tell you, they're real. And I drove straight into one. Started like any other late shift. I was hauling a load of auto parts out of Kansas City, aiming to make Denver by morning. My cab smelled of stale coffee and cheap air freshener, and the radio churned out static no matter what station I tried. I had a 3-hour window to burn, so I figured I'd take a shortcut. A 2-lane stretch off I-70 marked on my map as Route 13. I knew better. Every fiber of my trucker brain screamed, "Don't do it." But time was money, and I wasn't about to blow my schedule over some old wives' tales. The road was pitch black. No streetlights, no reflectors, just my high beams carving weak tunnels into the darkness. It wasn't long before the world outside stopped feeling real. Trees twisted unnaturally, their branches clawing over the asphalt like skeletal fingers. The air was heavy, thicker than any fog I'd ever driven through. And then the first sign appeared. A battered old board nailed to a tree with faded, peeling letters that read, "Turn back." I laughed it off. Probably some local prank. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy churn in my stomach. A mile later, my headlights caught something in the road. A deer, or so I thought. Its eyes glinted like broken glass, and its body seemed off. Too long, too gaunt. Its ribs poked through its matted fur as it stood there, staring at me. Not frozen like normal deer, just waiting. I honked, but it didn't budge. I slammed on the brakes, cursing as my truck skidded to a halt. When I looked back up, it was gone. No sound of hooves, no rustle of underbrush. Just silence. Too silent. I kept going, gripping the wheel tighter now, telling myself it was just road fatigue. But then the radio crackled. Finally, a signal. Relief washed over me as I twisted the knob. A gravelly voice burst through the static, distorted but clear enough to make my blood run cold. "You're not supposed to be here." The engine sputtered. My headlights flickered. And for the first time in years, I felt genuine fear in my gut. I reached for my CB radio, calling out to any truckers in the area. "Breaker, breaker, this is Big Rig Jake on Route 13. Anyone out there? Over." Silence. Then, a reply. But it wasn't a trucker. A low, wet whisper slithered through the speaker. "Turn. Around." I yanked the mic cord out of its socket, cursing under my breath. The GPS screen flickered, then froze, showing a location pin in the middle of a black void. The name read, "Nowhere." My blood turned ice. I'd been driving for hours. There should have been intersections, rest stops, something. But the road stretched on endlessly, a black ribbon coiling through the void. And then I saw it, red taillights ahead, blinking faintly through the haze. Another truck. Relief surged through me. I floored it, closing the gap. But as I approached, I noticed something wrong. The truck was old, ancient, really. Its trailer was rusted through, and its cab looked more like a relic than anything roadworthy. The plates were missing, and its brake lights pulsed irregularly, almost like they were breathing. I pulled alongside it to signal the driver. My horn blared once, twice. No response. Just a shadowed figure in the cab, head slumped forward. Sleeping? Unlikely, but I waved anyway. My lights illuminated his face for half a second, and I nearly swerved off the road. The driver had no eyes, just empty, hollow sockets staring straight ahead. I floored it, leaving the ghost truck behind as my heart pounded like a drum. But it didn't stay behind for long. In my side mirror, those haunting red lights appeared again. Closer this time. Too close. I could hear the grinding of its engine. A low, guttural roar that drowned out everything else. My rig shuddered as if something was pushing it, trying to run me off the road. I screamed into the void, cursing whatever nightmare I'd driven into. But the truck didn't let up. Its headlights flared, flooding my cab with blinding white light. Then, the horn. A deafening, otherworldly bellow that rattled my bones. That's when I saw the bridge. A rickety old thing barely wide enough for one vehicle at a time. The guardrails were splintered, and the drop below was nothing but darkness. I didn't have a choice. I sped up, praying my rig wouldn't collapse the damn thing. The ghost truck followed, its horn blaring like a death knell. As I reached the middle of the bridge, the planks groaned beneath my wheels. The other truck was right on my bumper now, its lights melting into the night. Then, with a deafening crack, the bridge started to give way. I floored it, my tires screeching as I shot off the other side just as the structure collapsed. The ghost truck didn't make it. I watched in my mirrors as it plunged into the void, its lights flickering out one by one. But the nightmare wasn't over. As I pulled onto solid ground, my engine died completely. The cab lights flickered, and the radio crackled back to life. You escaped. This time. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my flashlight, my emergency bag, and started walking. 10 miles later, I stumbled onto a gas station, my legs shaking and my sanity hanging by a thread. The attendant looked up as I staggered in, his face pale. "You came off Route 13? He asked. I nodded. He just shook his head. "No one comes back from there." The gas station was a rundown shack, the kind you only see in horror movies. Flickering neon sign, a single pump that looked older than my truck, and shelves stocked with expired snacks. The attendant, a wiry guy with sunken eyes, was staring at me like I'd crawled out of a grave. "Route 13? He asked again, as if he didn't believe what he just heard. "Yeah," I rasped, my throat dry and raw. My rig broke down after the bridge." He shook his head slowly, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "No one drives Route 13 at night. Hell, most of us around here won't drive it during the day." "Well, I didn't exactly plan on whatever the hell just happened back there," I snapped, my nerves fraying. "What is that road? What's out there?" The guy hesitated, like he was debating whether to tell me the truth or just write me off as another lost trucker. Finally, he sighed and gestured for me to follow him behind the counter. "You're not gonna like what I have to say, but you've already seen enough to know it's real." I followed him into a cramped office lit by a single buzzing fluorescent bulb. The walls were covered in faded maps and old newspaper clippings. He pointed to one of the articles, yellowed with age, the headline screaming, "Missing truckers pile up. Local road feared cursed." Underneath the headline was a grainy black and white photo of a semi, its cab twisted like a crushed can, half submerged in a swamp. The text below detailed a series of disappearances dating back decades. All truckers, all last seen heading down Route 13. "What's this supposed to mean?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The attendant rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes darting to the window like he expected something, or someone, to appear. "Route 13's been bad for as long as anyone around here can remember. It's not just a cursed road. It's a magnet, you know? A hunting ground for things that ain't natural." I stared at him, my pulse thundering in my ears. "Things? Like what?" He grimaced, like saying the words would summon them. "Call 'em spirits, call 'em demons, call 'em whatever you want. All I know is, folks who go down that road at night don't come back the same. If they come back at all." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "You're telling me I drove into some kind of supernatural trap? I'm telling you that you're lucky to be standing here." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But you're not out of it yet. That road doesn't just let people walk away. It'll come for you." My chest tightened. "What do you mean, it'll come for me?" "The damn bridge collapsed, I saw it. Whatever was chasing me went down with it." The attendant laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think a little thing like a bridge is gonna stop something like that? Nah, man. It's part of the road. It'll find a way back. It always does." I felt the blood drain from my face. "So what the hell am I supposed to do? Just wait for it to show up again?" He shook his head. "You've got to break the connection. Burn something from your rig. Something important. It's the only way to sever the tie." I didn't have time to question him. The sound of a horn blaring outside made both of us jump. My heart stopped as I recognized it. The ghost truck. The attendant paled, his hand trembling as he reached for something under the counter. A shotgun. "It's here," he whispered. The horn blared again, louder this time, rattling the windows. I glanced outside and saw it, those same blood-red taillights glowing through the fog. The truck sat idling at the edge of the parking lot, its engine rumbling like distant thunder. "What do I do?" I hissed, my pulse racing. The attendant shoved the shotgun into my hands. "Stall it. I'll grab what we need." "Stall it? Are you out of your goddamn mind?" I barely had time to argue before he disappeared into the back room, leaving me alone with nothing but the shotgun and my rapidly fraying sanity. The truck's headlights flicked on, bathing the gas station in a blinding white glow. The engine roared, and the truck lurched forward, its massive grille aimed straight at me. Panic surged through me as I stumbled outside, the shotgun clutched tightly in my hands. "Stay back," I shouted, though my voice cracked with fear. The truck didn't stop. It barreled forward, faster than anything that size should have been able to move. I raised the shotgun and fired, the blast shattering the night. The buckshot hit the grill, but it didn't even slow the damn thing down. The headlights flared brighter, almost blinding, and I could feel the heat of the engine bearing down on me. Then, just as it reached the edge of the gas station lot, the truck skidded to a halt. The engine died, and the lights winked out, plunging the world into silence. I stood there, shaking, the shotgun still aimed at the spot where the truck had been. But it was gone. No sign of it. Just tire tracks leading into the darkness. The attendant reappeared, holding a small metal box. "We've got to burn it," he said, his voice urgent. "What is that?" I asked, my hands still trembling. He opened the box, revealing a small, rusted piece of metal, a fragment of my truck's grill. "You brought a piece of the road with you," he said. "We burn this, and maybe you've got a shot at walking away from this." I didn't argue. Together, we doused the fragment in gasoline and set it alight. The flames roared, bright and angry, as the metal twisted and blackened. The wind picked up, howling like a chorus of voices. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the fire died out. The night went still. The attendant let out a shaky breath. That should do it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. I could still feel the road out there, waiting, watching, and I knew someday it would call me back. For weeks, I stayed off the road. I couldn't sleep without hearing that horn in my dreams, or seeing those red taillights seared into the back of my mind. Every creak in my house sounded like the rumble of a distant engine. Every shadow out my window felt like it was watching me. I thought I was done trucking for good. The very idea of climbing back into a rig made my stomach churn. I started taking odd jobs around town, anything to avoid long drives or empty highways. But the thing about the road, it doesn't let you go. One night, just as I was starting to convince myself it was all over, I heard it again. The horn, that same bone-shaking blare, but this time it wasn't outside. It was inside my head, like the damn thing had wormed its way into my brain and was blowing it straight from the depths of my nightmares. I shot up from my couch, drenched in sweat. My living room was pitch dark except for the flickering of the TV I'd left on. Static hissed across the screen, and a cold draft seeped through the cracks in my windows, despite it being a warm summer night. And then I saw them. Mud-slick tire tracks ran straight through my living room, disappearing into the hallway that led to my bedroom. My first thought was that I was losing it, finally cracking under the weight of it all. But then I heard it, a faint growl, like an engine idling in the distance. I grabbed the shotgun I'd kept since that night at the gas station and crept down the hall. My heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear anything else. The tracks glistened under the faint light from the hallway bulb, and as I followed them, I realized they weren't just mud. They were mixed with something darker. Oil. I turned the corner into my bedroom, and that's when I froze. The window was wide open, curtains billowing in the breeze. And sitting on my bed was a piece of my truck's grill, the same piece we'd burned. Only now it was whole, clean, like it had never been torched. I backed out of the room, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the shotgun. That's when the lights in the house started to flicker. The low growl of the engine grew louder, and the air turned thick with the acrid stench of diesel. "Jake!" a voice rasped. I spun around, aiming the shotgun at the darkened hallway. There was no one there, but the voice came again, closer this time. "You can't run, Jake." I fired blindly, the shotgun blast echoing through the house. The light bulb in the hallway shattered, plunging me into darkness. And then I saw it. A shape in the shadows, massive and hulking, with glowing red eyes that pierced through the black. It wasn't the truck, not entirely. It was something else. A grotesque, twisted figure that looked like a man fused with metal and machinery. Its limbs were sharp and jagged, its torso wrapped in chains that rattled with every step it took. And its face, if you could even call it that, was a horrifying blend of flesh and chrome, with gears whirring where a mouth should have been. It stepped closer, the floorboards groaning under its weight. "You're part of the road now, Jake," it said, its voice grinding like metal on metal. "You can't escape. Not forever." I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body frozen in place. "What do you want from me?" I croaked. It tilted its head, the gears in its face clicking and spinning. "The road doesn't let go of what belongs to it. You should have stayed on it. Now you've brought it with you." The growl of an engine filled the house again, louder and louder, until it felt like the walls were vibrating. The thing reached out a clawed metal hand, and I knew if it touched me, that would be it. I'd be part of whatever hellish existence it came from. But just as it lunged, the horn blared again, this time from outside. The thing froze, its head snapping toward the window. I didn't waste a second. I bolted down the hall and out the front door, not stopping until I reached the middle of my yard. My rig was there, the one I'd abandoned weeks ago, its headlights glowing faintly. But it wasn't the same. The cab looked warped, its metal twisted into unnatural shapes, like it had been molded by hands that didn't understand human design. The door creaked open on its own, and I swear I heard it whisper, "Drive." I didn't have a choice. Whatever that thing in the house was, it wasn't going to stop. And somehow I knew the only way to end this was to go back to Route 13. I climbed into the cab, the seat cold and damp beneath me. The engine roared to life, and the headlights flared, cutting through the night. The truck lurched forward on its own, and I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. As I pulled onto the road, the growl from inside the house faded. The air grew heavy, the darkness around me swallowing the world whole. And then I saw it up ahead, Route 13, stretching endlessly into the void. The GPS flickered to life, the screen displaying a single word, "Home." I don't remember much after that. Just flashes. Trees bending unnaturally, the road splitting open like a wound, shadows moving in ways they shouldn't. And then, finally, a blinding light. When I woke up, I was parked on the side of a highway, a regular highway. My truck was gone, and the sun was rising over the horizon. I don't know how I got there, or how long I'd been gone, but I know one thing for sure. The road let me go. For now. It's been 6 months since that night. I'd love to say everything's back to normal, that I've moved on, but the truth is, the road never really lets you go. It leaves a mark, one you can't see but can feel, like an itch buried deep in your skull, just out of reach. I quit trucking for good, sold my house, packed what little I could, and moved to a small apartment in a quiet city. I don't drive anymore, not even to the grocery store. Walking feels safer, familiar, but even that doesn't stop the nightmares. Every night I dream of the road. Sometimes it's the bridge, collapsing into the void. Sometimes it's the ghost truck, its headlights burning holes into my chest. And sometimes it's the thing from my house, whispering in that grinding metallic voice, "You're part of the road now." I've learned to live with it, though, mostly. But then 2 nights ago, something happened that I can't ignore. It started with a sound, a low rumble, like a distant engine idling, waking me in the dead of night. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from beneath me. I live on the 3rd floor. I grabbed the flashlight I keep by my bed and crept into the hallway. The sound grew louder as I approached the living room, and when I turned the corner, I froze. Tire tracks. They snaked across my carpet, dark and oily, just like the ones I'd seen in my house that night. They led straight to the window, which was wide open despite the fact that I'd locked it before going to bed. The air was cold, heavy with the stench of diesel. And then I heard it. A horn. Not loud like before. Just a soft, mournful wail, like something calling to me from far away. I didn't sleep after that. Just sat in my chair, shotgun in hand, staring at the tracks until the first light of dawn seeped through the window. By then, the tracks had faded, but the feeling in my gut hadn't. Something's coming. I can feel it. The next day, I went out for the first time in weeks. I needed air, needed to feel the ground under my feet, solid and real. But as I walked through the city streets, I started noticing things. Strange things. A car stalled at an intersection, its engine sputtering out for no reason. A man in a delivery van staring blankly ahead, his knuckles white against the wheel. A bus that sat idling at a red light long after it turned green, its passengers all looking out the windows with empty, glassy eyes. And then, as I passed an alleyway, I saw them. Tire tracks, slick and black, leading into the shadows. I should have kept walking, should have ignored them, but some part of me, some stupid, reckless part of me had to know. I followed the tracks, my breath fogging in the cool air, the alley growing darker with every step. The tracks ended at a rusted metal door, barely hanging on its hinges. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me first. That same thick, oily stench of diesel and burnt rubber. Inside was a garage, or what used to be one. Tools hung on the walls, their edges corroded and blackened. A single light bulb flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows across the floor. And in the middle of the room, there it was. My truck, or at least what was left of it. The cab was twisted and warped, the metal blackened like it had been through a fire. The tires were shredded, hanging limply from the rims. And on the hood, scratched deep into the paint, was a single word: home. I stumbled back, my chest tightening, my throat dry. That's when I heard the door slam shut behind me. The light bulb flared, flooding the room with blinding light, and the growl of an engine filled the air. But it wasn't coming from the truck. It was coming from the walls. They began to move, folding inward like machinery, gears grinding and hissing as the room shrank around me. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. The walls groaned, their surfaces rippling like liquid metal, and then I saw them. Faces, dozens of them, pressed into the metal, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths frozen in silent screams. "Jake!" a voice rasped, echoing through the room. "You can't run." The floor split beneath me, and I fell into darkness. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment. No tracks, no truck, no sign that any of it had happened. But I wasn't alone. Sitting on my coffee table was a piece of metal, rusted and jagged, with a single word etched into it: drive. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know the road isn't done with me. It never will be. If you're reading this, consider this your warning. If you're ever out on the highways late at night, and you see a turnoff marked Route 13, don't take it. Don't even slow down, because once you're on the road, there's no getting off. Not really. I'd like to say that after that night, I finally got some clarity, that I'd pieced everything together, figured out why the road chose me, or why it wouldn't let me go. But the truth is, the road doesn't give you answers. It only takes. It's been another 2 weeks since the rusted piece of metal appeared on my coffee table. I left it there, untouched, like it might explode if I so much as looked at it too long. But the road doesn't need you to pick up its breadcrumbs. It makes sure you follow them one way or another. It started with the dreams. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the smell of diesel choking me, my ears ringing with that damn horn. Sometimes I'd see faces, those faces pressed into the walls of that twisted garage. Other times, it was the thing that looked like a man but moved like a machine, dragging its metal claws across the floor, whispering, "You belong to us now." But then the dreams stopped, and that's when the real terror began. I was sitting on my couch one night, trying to lose myself in some mindless late-night TV, when I noticed something strange. The flickering light outside my window wasn't the street lamp. It was headlights. They sat there, unmoving, for what felt like hours. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just some car parked on the curb. But deep down, I knew. The road had found me again. When I finally worked up the nerve to peek through the blinds, my blood ran cold. There was no car, no truck, just two glowing red orbs hovering in the darkness, staring back at me like eyes. I stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table, my heart hammering in my chest. The orbs didn't move, but the longer I stared, the more I felt pulled, like they were calling me, whispering to me without making a sound. "Come back, Jake." I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed, until the orbs finally blinked out. The room went dark again, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was over. But then the phone rang. The sound nearly made me jump out of my skin. Who the hell would call me at this hour? I picked up the receiver, my hand trembling, and pressed it to my ear. "Hello," I whispered. At first, there was nothing but static. Then, a familiar voice cut through it, deep and grinding, like the roar of an engine. "It's time to drive." The line went dead. By the time I heard the horn, I was already moving. I didn't know why. My body felt like it was on autopilot, dragging me to the front door, down the stairs, and out onto the street. I wasn't even wearing shoes. The pavement was cold and wet beneath my feet, but I barely felt it. Parked in the middle of the road, waiting for me was my rig. It looked the same as before, twisted, warped, a grotesque parody of what it once was. The cab door swung open as I approached, a low growl rumbling from its engine, even though no one was inside to start it. I didn't want to get in. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn around, to run, to fight. But I couldn't. My legs carried me up into the cab, and the door slammed shut behind me. The dashboard lit up, a sickly green glow that made my skin crawl. The GPS flickered to life, the same single word flashing on the screen: home. The truck lurched forward on its own, and I gripped the wheel out of instinct, even though I wasn't the one driving. The world outside blurred into darkness, the city lights disappearing as the truck carried me back to the one place I'd sworn never to return. Route 13. I don't know how long I was on the road. Time felt meaningless out there. The darkness was thicker than I remembered, swallowing the headlights like they barely existed. The only sound was the low hum of the engine, steady and unyielding. But then, the darkness began to shift. Shapes moved just beyond the edge of the light, figures, tall and twisted, with glowing eyes that flickered like dying bulbs. They watched me as I passed, their faces blank and featureless, their limbs moving in unnatural, jerky motions. I tried to look away, but my reflection in the windshield caught my eye. Only, it wasn't me. It was something else. My face was there, but warped, stretched like it was being pulled into the glass. My eyes glowed red, and my mouth was twisted into a grin that didn't belong to me. The GPS beeped, pulling my attention back to the screen. A new word had appeared beneath home. Stop. The truck groaned to a halt, and the engine died. Silence fell over the road, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I didn't want to look outside, but the pull was too strong. When I finally did, my heart nearly stopped. The bridge. It was back, stretching across the void, its planks cracked and rotting, but somehow holding together. And standing in the middle of it, waiting for me, was the thing from my house. The man-machine hybrid, its claws glinting in the dim light, its hollow, glowing eyes locked onto mine. It raised one hand, beckoning me forward. The GPS beeped again. One final word flashed on the screen: choose. I don't know what came over me, but I opened the door and stepped out onto the road. The air was cold, and the void beyond the bridge felt like it was pulling at my very soul. The thing on the bridge didn't move, just kept its hand outstretched, waiting. I stood there, frozen, torn between the truck and the thing calling me forward. And then, somewhere deep in the back of my mind, I heard it again. The horn. It was faint, distant, but growing louder with every second. And I realized, too late, that it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from beneath me. The ground cracked, and the last thing I saw was the bridge collapsing into the void, the thing's glowing eyes burning into my memory as I fell. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment, but this time there was no piece of metal, no whispering voices, just silence. And I know what you're thinking. Did I escape? Am I free? No, I'm still out there, somewhere. The road doesn't let you go. Not really. It's been a year since I fell, or at least that's what I think. Time doesn't work the same way anymore, not where I am. I'm writing this because it's the only thing keeping me tethered to what little humanity I have left. If anyone finds this, if anyone's still out there, you need to know the truth. I didn't wake up in my apartment like before. This time, there was no false reprieve, no cruel trick to make me think I was safe. When I opened my eyes, I was still falling, plummeting through a void so dark and infinite it felt like I was drowning in ink. But the worst part wasn't the falling. It was what I saw as I fell. Faces. Thousands of them, maybe millions. Some I recognized. Truckers I'd met on the road. Old friends. People I'd only seen in passing. Their faces twisted in agony, pressed into the shifting walls of the void. Their mouths open in silent screams. Their eyes followed me as I tumbled past, and I knew, deep down, that they weren't just faces. They were souls, trapped here, just like I was about to be. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the falling stopped. I landed hard, the impact jarring but not enough to kill me. I opened my eyes and found myself standing in the middle of a highway, an endless, cracked stretch of asphalt lined with dead, skeletal trees. The air was thick and heavy, tinged with the acrid stench of burning rubber and gasoline. The sky above wasn't a sky at all. It was black, churning like an ocean in a storm, flashes of light rippling through it like distant explosions. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, and the only sound was the faint, ever-present hum of an engine somewhere far away. I was back on Route 13, or what was left of it. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the comforting quiet of an empty night, but an oppressive, suffocating stillness, like the world was holding its breath. And then I saw them, the other trucks. They were scattered along the road, their rusted hulks leaning like broken skeletons. Some were overturned, their cabs smashed and their trailers split open, spilling their contents onto the cracked asphalt. Others were parked in neat rows, their headlights dimly flickering, as if they were waiting for something. I started walking, my boots crunching on the gravel. The road felt alive beneath my feet, pulsing faintly, like it had a heartbeat. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the air itself was pressing down on me, dragging me deeper into this hellish place. And then I saw it, my truck. It was parked in the middle of the road, its cab gleaming like polished obsidian, its headlights blazing brighter than I'd ever seen. The door creaked open as I approached, and I swear I could hear it breathing, a low, guttural rasp that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't want to get in. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run, to fight. But I knew there was no point. The road doesn't give you choices. It only pretends to. The cab was cold and damp, the seat stiff and unyielding beneath me. The engine roared to life the moment I sat down, and the GPS flickered on, displaying one final word: drive. The road stretched endlessly before me, the headlights carving weak tunnels into the darkness. The world outside the cab was a blur of shadows and flickering lights, shapes twisting and writhing just beyond the edge of my vision. I don't know how long I drove. Time has no meaning here. Hours, days, weeks. They all blend together into one unending nightmare. The road never changes, but the things on it do. Sometimes I see other trucks, their cabs empty and their trailers dragging like dead weight. Sometimes I see people, their faces twisted in terror as they sprint alongside the road, their eyes darting toward me, begging for help I can't give. And sometimes I see them, the things that live in the shadows, the figures with glowing eyes and limbs that bend the wrong way, their metallic claws scraping across the asphalt as they watch me pass. They never approach, never attack. They just watch, like they're waiting for something. I don't know why the road chose me. Maybe it doesn't need a reason. Maybe it's just hungry, and I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I do know one thing. This place isn't a highway. It's a hunting ground, a feeding ground, a place where the road itself is alive, and it never stops consuming. The other truckers, the missing ones, they're all here. I've seen their rigs, their faces pressed into the shifting walls of the void, their screams echoing in the endless hum of the engine. They're part of the road now, and soon I will be too. This is my last message, my final warning. If you're reading this, if you ever hear whispers of Route 13 or see its name on a map, don't take it. Don't even look at it. Because once you're on the road, there's no getting off. Not really. As I write this, the GPS has changed again. One final word flashing on the screen, over and over, like a heartbeat, home. And I know deep down that it's not talking about the place I came from. It's talking about the place I'm going. The road always gets what it wants. And now it wants me.